Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Today, I'm joined by DJ Zullo of Knicks Film School to break down how excited we are to see Mikal Bridges on offense and how the Knicks can best maintain their spacing.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We're now available on all platforms. So if you want to become an everydayer, be sure to subscribe and hit that notifications bell to ensure you never miss an episode, and do the same on your audio podcast platform of choice. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster, joining you today for what I'm going to say is my favorite episode I've recorded this offseason. I'm once again joined by the incomparable DJ Zullo, one of the smartest basketball minds out there, certainly one of the smartest that we were lucky enough to have on the show. And we are diving deep, getting excited about Mikal Bridges and why spacing is ultimately going to be the king for the Knicks winning a championship this season for the first time in 50 years. All right, guys, as promised, lucky enough to be joined by my buddy, DJ Zullo, fresh off a European vacation. I'm sure spending some time scouting Rokas Jokubaitis while overseas. DJ, welcome in, buddy. How's it going? It's been a little while.
It's been good. You know, I haven't, my Rokas film was a little light this time of year. Unfortunately, though, I hear there's a good chance he could be coming to Summer League. So hopefully we get some like fresh film on the stateside with him. But everything's been good, you know, trying to get back in the swing of things. I feel like this Knicks offseason has been very positive, but also very interesting. And there's a lot of things that are still to be determined, but a lot of things for us to talk about and sort of try to flesh out a little bit.
Absolutely. I wanted to start off with some Mikal Bridges optimism, because I think I've been guilty on this pod of like doing all these episodes, and outside the last one I did was leaning optimism, but just coming on and listing all the reasons like, well, here's why this might not work out. Here's why this might not work out. And not just leaning into the fact that it's pretty awesome that the Knicks are adding a guy who's been an efficient 20-point scorer in this league and is unselfish. He can shoot the basketball and can more than hold his own defensively. What are you most excited about to see from him on the offensive end of the floor and his fit on offense for this Knicks team?
Yeah, so I think in terms of his offensive fit, and I know there's been some concern, and I feel like it's been warranted to a degree regarding swapping out Bridges or swapping out DiVincenzo for Bridges in terms of like, how is that going to impact the spacing? I am very cognizant of that. And I feel like, especially with Brunson and Randall, I feel like that is a necessary component. And DiVincenzo, his sheer volume, his efficiency, his ability to shoot threes from 28 feet out, like his deep spacing to me was an underrated trait of his coming over to the Knicks. And that really held up last season. So there is a concern there. And I feel like with some of the film I've watched of Bridges, especially his last couple of years with the Suns, where he's playing off whether it's Chris Paul or Devin Booker, like he's, you know, third, sometimes a second option, sometimes fourth option. So he's really an off-ball player primarily. You really saw how teams would respect him. And to me, he was respected as a great shooter. And the part of his game that really shines as a floor spacer is that if you're going to give him space and you're going to have to close out hard on him, he's going to eat up hard closeouts. He did it with Phoenix his last couple of years there as he developed some more high-level ball handling. He did it with Brooklyn. He can take 2 or 3 dribbles on a closeout, either get to the basket or get into a pull-up game, which is really efficient in that 2-point area. So to me, even though he is not the level of shooter that DiVincenzo is, because he's a more diverse offensive player, it requires teams to stay attached to him more than maybe you would or anyone would be, you know, instinctively suggest based on lining up Bridges versus DiVincenzo as shooters, because obviously DiVincenzo is a better 3-point shooter, but because DiVincenzo could struggle a little bit inside the arc, that mitigates some of his elite spacing, because you could run him off the line and be quite comfortable with the results. Just today I was looking at DiVincenzo in the playoffs. And yeah, he had some really high level scoring games, but there were also some games where like he just didn't have it. And to me, that was when he was run off the line and got inside the arc. His driving, while it increased the playoffs, he shot 34% on drives in the postseason on 91 drives. Decent, sample size there, and that just speaks to some of the concerns I think the Knicks had with him going forward as a great regular season player, but maybe not quite the guy you need in the playoffs. And I feel like while you may give up a little bit in terms of the deep spacing when you swap him out for Bridges, you're gaining much more in terms of a high level offensive player that can obviously catch and shoot, but also make plays off a closeout, whether it's with the pass or with the shot.
What have you seen from Bridges' development? As I kind of want to boil this down to like his like what he does off of closeouts and also his ability to go in isolations or go off a screen, basically as an on-ball player over the course of his career. Because I think like the more you read and the deeper you dive into it, I think there's more there than the stats, which obviously weren't very favorable to him on the Nets. And you're always, I think, when we have these conversations from a Knicks perspective, you're trying to thread that line of, all right, how does he bring out the best of him as a role player in Phoenix and the best of him as a star in Phoenix, and just sort of combine those down the middle and become sort of this ultimate like flex role player / like part-time pseudo star that gives you everything you need depending on who the other players are on the floor and what a specific situation calls for. But I go back to some of the rim numbers early in his career, and they were just exceptional. After like shooting 64% at the rim as a rookie, he was 73% his second year, 76% his third year, 79%, just ridiculous, his fourth year on the Suns. And then before getting traded, when the volume went up, he was at 68%. The first half of that 22-23 season in Phoenix, basically the same in Brooklyn, before falling off a cliff a little bit down to 62%, which obviously is not terrible, but he went from a guy who for 3 years of his NBA career was a 93rd percentile or above finisher to a 35th percentile finisher, which again is the reality of going from maybe the fourth option on a team competing for a championship to the clear-cut number one on a team that didn't make the playoffs. And yet, if you dive into the film, and in my case, if you do some reading on it, like Lucas Kaplan over at Nets Daily had a really good article on it, like there was reason to see that, all right, like even if the numbers went down, like if he was put back into a Suns-esque context, which I think in a lot of ways he will be on the Knicks, maybe not quite that much spacing, but in some ways even more powerful offensive engines around him, he can regain some of that efficiency. The rim volume was quite good last year. It was actually higher than it was during his first run of play on the Nets. He turned a lot of the mid-range shots he took into threes, and you saw more conscious pick and roll, like manipulation. All right, I'm being blitzed. Like, I'm going to get off the ball quickly. They're guarding me one-on-one. Like, I can attack this. Like, I see Trae Young here. I'm going to split this really quickly, get all the way to the rim, throw a Pinoy step at the basket, and find a way to finish. And I think there is more baked-in versatility into his game now that will ultimately reflect in his efficiency now that he's in a better environment. I guess the question is, to what extent and how high can he ramp that up as someone whose advantage is length and touch, but not someone who ultimately is going to be a great athlete or is ever going to be kind of like a great vertical finisher at the rim?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think a little bit is it's a question I feel like it's the one question I have with him that I don't feel like I have a great answer for, because there is some areas where he has improved his versatility. You mentioned the Pinoy step, which for anyone that doesn't doesn't get the vernacular, it's basically like it's on your first step on your drive. So on your first, when you pick the ball up on that first step, you're basically bringing the ball up high to almost give the impression that you're going up for a shot, and then you bring it back down. The defender and theoretically is going to jump at that. You get underneath and you can finish it. He's probably one of the there's like 2 or 3 guys in the league that do that. And I noticed against the Knicks, at least, Hartenstein, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later, he blocked 2 of those. And it was almost like he had scouted that play so well because he knew it was coming that he was able to sort of time that and not go for that initial up fake. So I feel like there's some of this where, for Bridges specifically, you have all these tools now, or more tools than you had in Phoenix. You're trying to figure out, like, when am I going to these things? Because his tool bag is definitely wider. It just felt like with the Nets last year, he had a hard time developing that awareness of when to go to certain moves. Whereas in Phoenix, his first couple of years, these were a lot of like just downhill drives. And, he's, while not a strong player physically, was able to take contact and finish at a reasonable level. So I think for in the Knicks regard, the spacing should be better. Now, I don't know how much, better for him as a driver, because I think a lot of it's going to depend on what kind of year Julius is going to have shooting the ball. And that always sort of like, you go into a season, you never really know it in that regard. And then the second thing is, without Hartenstein, you're going to have Mitchell Robinson, if he's in the game, sort of camped out in that dunker spot. So that is an area that I know we saw with Claxton a little bit last year, and then a year before. Ayton had a little bit more of that spacing component where he would at least be available for a kick out mid-range opportunity and not going to just park himself in the dunker spot. So there is going to be some, level, and that might be something that the Knicks are going to have to figure out, and Bridges himself try to figure out where his drivers are going to come from. But I feel like the Knicks are going to they really did a good job last season in getting the ball to the second side. That was one of the developments they had at a necessity when they had all the injuries. To me, that is an area in terms of team building that they should be able to continue this season. So if Bridges is going to get that ball on the second side, if you have a initial Brunson Randall or Brunson Robinson action on the strong side, if that ball gets to the weak side and it's Bridges catching with the defender closing, he's going to have a drive to the basket and he's going to be able to finish on a straight line. So in that area, you might see his drive efficiency actually go up a little bit, but certainly he's gotten more diverse as a driver, as a finisher. I think there's an area of his game that he's got to figure out, is when to sort of go to these new moves and areas of skills that he's developed over the last couple of years.
All right, guys, we're going to continue talking. Mikal Bridges is going to continue talking our potential concerns about the Knicks offense next on Locked On Knicks. All right, guys, we want to take a second to tell you about our friends over at GameTime. GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices of the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all in prices fused from your seat and their lowest price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. For me, took the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. I was in Phoenix visiting my girlfriend, and the Knicks just happened to be in town. I said, I want to go, and I want to save some money, and GameTime is the way to do that. So why is GameTime actually better? To me, the number one separator is the lowest price guarantee, which means if you find a lower price on any other ticketing site, GameTime will guarantee 110% of the difference. They also offer seat views where you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. The GameTime ticket coverage guarantee your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. This is kind of a niche question. I don't know if you've watched enough film to answer it. I certainly haven't, but what do you think of him as just a connective passer and someone who can just keep the machine moving? Because to me, that's what always stood out when I watched him in Phoenix. Not that he was brilliant or was making these next level reads or consistently making skip passes to really torture a defense, but I think where that Phoenix team was more than the sum of their parts was that they consistently had four and depending on like the kind of night or game Ayton was having, like 5 really quick decision makers on the floor. And they had a lot of spacing, but they also really leveraged their spacing. And that's what I'm, I guess, constantly trying to look for the Knicks, especially when Julius Randle's on the floor. And you made this point, I heard you on Knicks Film School talking about this the other day, that after the Knicks got OG Anunoby, Julius really leaned into that aspect of his game. And it was a little bit less of 2021 Julius, where it's pound, double. All right, I know Reggie Block's supposed to be here on the floor, so I'm going to throw this blind, no look, over my head pass to that wing. And it's amazing, and it shows you what kind of talent he has as a passer. But it on a team now that has so much more option and so much more baked in versatility, it feels like the best way to leverage it is to have those quick decisions. And I think where I'm fearing some drop off from last season's playoffs is having DiVincenzo on the floor a little bit less, having Hart on the floor a little bit less. 2 guys who you almost took that for granted. I mean, Hartenstein more than anyone else, right? It was just fantastic about that. And maybe this dips a toe into that conversation you wanted to have about what they lose in Hartenstein. But with the I guess slightly less spacing also that Mitch brings to the table, to me, that kind of quick connective passing and decision-making is going to be such a premium. How do you think he kind of fits into that structure?
Yeah, I think he's very good at it. I think with I think it's a Villanova trait, and also a trait the Knicks seek out. I thought Grimes was good at this
Yeah,
area of just keeping the
great
ball
call.
moving, topping for all the things that I'm not the biggest fan of his, but in terms of his connective passing, that is one of his strong suits, especially in the half court. So quickly, obviously, would be a high level in this area. Josh Hart as a trade, and then a signing, high level. DiVincenzo, the same thing, and I feel like Bridges sort of fits into that. Where the Knicks, they don't have Randall might be first position, consider like close to maybe not an elite passer, but like pushing that envelope, especially when he's like at his best. But they have a lot of guys that can make the right play in terms of just keeping the ball moving, as you said. So I think Bridges definitely fits right into that. I feel like the Phoenix point reference is spot on. That's something that really shined when you watch him, especially that 21-22 season, where I feel like everything about him as a dynamic role player just was crystallized. And even that first half of the 22-23 season, just him as a third option or a top 30-ish player, top 40 player in the NBA on a good night, but a guy that is really going to just do everything really well. I felt like he just was like that. That's to me the archetype that if the Knicks can get that player, he's really going to elevate their season a little bit. So in terms of his connected passing, I didn't see anything that would give me any pause that he's going to negatively impact it. I feel like would probably be in the same tier as DiVincenzo, maybe a little bit lower, but certainly same tier as Josh Hart, like really good passers in the half court. That is just going to keep it moving, which is, not only Randall concern, but also like Brunson, for all his greatness, again, can get a little sticky with the ball. So you want to have guys around him that can certainly, keep it moving. Anunoby, probably the one guy that I think was better than advertised with Toronto, but certainly can get in trouble with his, he takes him a beat every now and then to either make a drive or get the ball moving to the other side. So I feel like he's the one where I would have a little bit of a question mark in terms of like his connective passing. I don't think it's poor, but I just don't know if it's like at the level of some of these other guys on the Knicks. But certainly with Randall and Brunson, you need the guys that could just, keep it moving, get the ball to the second side, which again, to me was one of the great revelations of last year's team, which I hope they can continue to tap into this year.
I do think it's, and this is something Bill Simmons has talked about a lot over the years. I mean, you see it on the best teams in NBA history. That type of passing becomes contagious. And I do think that, like, we talk about all these ancillary reasons the Knicks brought in Mikal Bridges, having another guy who's committed to that and is committed to like passing up a good shot for a great shot. Like, I do think you even saw that in the playoffs with OG, like on the best play of the Knicks season last year, Hartenstein in game 2 against the Sixers, like gets that offensive rebound, flings it out to OG, and like maybe like on another team in another context, like he's taking that shot. Instead, he says, hey, like Donte's better than me at this. Like I'm making one more pass. And like, and in like a moment where like most players would freeze, like especially players like Anunoby, to your point, where that is not inherently in their game. Like he made that play, and that gives me a little bit of latent optimism that like another guy to put on the floor to lean into that, like that can only help. I think we are sort of dancing around like the core of what I'm trying to get into. And you addressed it with your point on Bridges and for DiVincenzo, and that is the Knicks spacing. And that also loops in like it is sort of this unifying theme of the Knicks offseason, because to me, that is my single biggest concern with Isaiah Hartenstein leaving. Like his ability to find ways to act as a spacer, even though he was not a shooter. And with his ability, like you and Benji highlighted this on the KFS pod, to set like those great like pin in screens and create threes that way. His ability to just always be a threat to do that off the ball. So his man wanted to stay attached. Of course, his little flip shot. What does it do for the Knicks going from him to Mitch on a more consistent basis, when in a theoretical world, if both those guys were back, I think they would have leaned a bit more towards Hartenstein and playing him the bulk of those minutes, just because it was such a boon to the Knicks offense after Mitch got hurt. And I guess part 2 of this question is, since you already addressed the DiVincenzo part, like where does Julius coming back fit into that as a guy who like certainly is not a downgrade as a shooter from Josh Hart, but does get so much of his offense around the rim, and in turn, I think like maybe creates even more of a clogging effect there. And I'm just wondering, like, what does this look like early in the year in particular when this team doesn't have a great rhythm, and how do they kind of address those concerns with Mitch being about as rim bound as any center in the league?
Well, it's to me the concern of mine coming into the
Yeah.
year. I feel like they can. I have some skepticism that Hartenstein can replicate the defensive season he had last year, this season. If you look at some of the all-in-one metrics, his defensive performance was elite, all defense, potentially defensive player of the year level stuff. Yeah. I don't know if you would get that type of year this year from him, because that is such a high level of performance on that end. But what he does do, and you highlight a lot of those in terms of his off-ball movement, his ability not only to set those pin-in screens, but if he's not going to be covered on the weak side, that ball gets over there. And let's say you're playing the Heat and Bam Adebayo is camped out in the paint, he's guarding Hartenstein. If that ball gets to the opposite corner and you have DiVincenzo on the wing, he can fly into a dribble handoff. And if Hartenstein sets a good screen, Bam is too far under the hoop to come out and get and help out and contest that 3-point shot. Those are areas that Hartenstein, you don't need to run plays for that. That is just flow offense that he is one of the best centers in the league at doing. And then the idea of he's not a spacer, but I've dubbed him like a movement five, where he's just constant motion, getting passing windows for his teammates, getting to the area where he gets that flip shot off, the floater from outside the restricted area. These are things that there's no center on the market that's a free agent. There's no center certainly on the Knicks roster that could do those things. I don't know if you can figure out a way to you're not going to replicate it. So how do you mitigate it? And to me, it's going to be an increase in shot diversity with Mikal Bridges, Julius Randle, hopefully a full healthy season. And then Brunson, you feel like you have enough. And then Anunoby as a catch and shoot player, as a guy that can beat a closeout, get into a pull up. Like, you have enough to where, Mitch is going to be in the dunker spot primarily. What are you going to, how do you guard against that? Well, you just have to be that much better in terms of your other four players as shooters, as playmakers, as creators. I feel like the Knicks can do that in the starting lineup with how they're designed and built right now, though it is certainly a concern. It's not something Mitch has ever developed. I think if there's one player on the roster that can sort of do some of those things, it's Jericho Sims offensively, that can, as a mover, his floater to me is like it's the shot that I just feel like is, of all the Knicks players, like it's so close to being like an effective NBA weapon, but it's just not there yet. And he's a guy that has gone to the weak side corner and gotten that dribble handoff game situation where you can kind of walk, you steal a three every now and then. So he's certainly done those things offensively at a level that gives you a little bit of hope. But, and the other part is, I pointed this out last season before Julius got hurt, his efficiency numbers were far and away better with Hartenstein. And that to me is because the space on Julius's drives, on his post-ups, were just better when Hartenstein was on the floor. So these are, if Julius is not going to be a shooter like he was, 2 seasons ago, then you have a legitimate problem. And that's why, it's like, is Julius going to be an effective 3-point shooter this year on volume? That to me, if you're going to write out your 5 biggest question marks or 5 biggest, areas where that could swing a Knicks season from being a good year to a great year, I think Julius shooting at a level close to what he did 2 years ago does more than any one area in accomplishing that goal of the Knicks really being an elite offensive team. Because I do think he's an effective floor spacer, regardless of how he's shooting, because he's so good putting the ball on the deck, and he's a willing shooter, and that goes a long way. But if he's shooting 32%, teams are, especially in the playoffs, are just going to ignore him. And then you have problems. And I feel like that is an area that, if Julius can shoot at a league average level on volume, the Knicks ceiling as an offense, even with Mitch as a starting center and Hartenstein out, can still be top 5 in the NBA. But these are legitimate questions. And, I feel like the Knicks can sort of make up for what Hartenstein was as a defender, maybe not quite that level with Mitch, hopefully playing 65, 70 games, big question mark there. But offensively, there are just things that Hartenstein does that there's just a few guys at the center position that can consistently do it. You can't teach it in my mind. You can sort of like
Yeah.
instill it as a principle, but to me, it's just like you're playing in flow, you're reading the game, your floor awareness, your mapping, all those things he just has innate. And it's going to be a hard area for the Knicks to replace. You're going to have to do it with high level shot making and on ball scoring, which the Knicks have 4 other guys in the starting lineup that could do all those things at a high level. So I still think there's a lot of positivity, but question marks certainly there with Hartenstein not in the fold anymore.
I think it's a great call because Hartenstein is not this monster athlete. He's not extraordinarily skilled, but like the way, like just his intuition in terms of how to create spacing is, and I think that's what you're getting at in terms of just being like natural and not something that can be taught. Like he just, his inclinations were always to find a way to create more space, and he knew how to do it. Mitch is almost the exact opposite, and that is a big flip. But
now,
moving
real quick, I should say this because it is an area Mitch does well, is that his spacing as a vertical threat is still there. Now, I know the Knicks don't tap into it a lot because Brunson is a really poor lob thrower. They don't really have another guy. Tyler
DJ, this has been my I know you're a long time listener. This has been my number one complaint for about since I started the podcast 5 years ago. That the Knicks have no one that can throw this guy a lob.
RJ would do it. Would run a couple plays for RJ. Maybe you get one a game, maybe. But it's it's even when he doesn't get the pass though, he is. And I clipped one last year against the Bucks late in the regular season where he just it was a hard roll to the rim, collapse, corner 3, wide open. So there is areas for him to help with the spacing, but you're dead on that he is typically going to be camped out in the dunker spot, and the Knicks are going to have to figure out other ways. He's going to have to be a better finisher, though. That's one area where he can't drop off anymore. His non-dunk finishing numbers have gone down 3 years in a row. Like he's in 40% territory as a finisher with layups. He's got to get better at it, and that will, if he can get back to where he was a couple of seasons ago, will help out in terms of just being an effective offensive player, maybe not like a highly impactful one.
All right, guys, sorry to cut things off in the middle of our conversation with DJ, but we got to leave you wanting some more, so we're going to continue with him tomorrow. I can say it now, it's the end of the episode. Maybe tomorrow's conversation might be even more interesting. We get into a whole bunch of different topics, including what the Knicks defense looks like, what Julius Randle's future is on the team, and whether the Knicks actually have enough minutes for everyone if they acquire a backup center. The math gets really, really tough. Me and DJ try and figure it out. We'll talk to you about that tomorrow on Locked On Knicks.